Marcus Washington clutches his daughter's trembling hand as the flight attendant towers over them, her voice cutting through the cabin. "Sir, you need to deplane immediately." His wife Sophia's eyes fill with tears while fellow passengers stare in shocked silence. Security officers approach. Marcus reaches for his phone just as it's slapped from his hand. "Playing the victim card won't work here," the attendant sneers. Little does she know, Marcus isn't calling for help. He's calling the airline's board of directors, because Marcus Washington doesn't just fly Skylight Airways, he owns it. But will his authority be enough to stop what's already been set in motion? Before we dive into this shocking story of discrimination at 30,000 feet, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you believe in standing up for justice and equality in today's world, smash that like button and subscribe to stay updated on more powerful true stories that need to be told. Now, let's see how this high-stakes confrontation began. Marcus Washington's journey to success began in a small apartment in South Chicago, where he spent nights coding while working 2 jobs to put himself through college. With determination that outmatched his limited resources, Marcus graduated with honors in computer engineering, landing an entry-level position at a mid-sized tech firm. Even then, Marcus encountered the glass ceiling that many black professionals face. Despite creating innovations that earned the company millions, he was repeatedly passed over for promotions in favor of less qualified white colleagues. Rather than accept this reality, Marcus channeled his frustration into fuel for his ambitions. At 32, he resigned and founded Washington Innovations from his basement, developing revolutionary secure communication systems for businesses. Within 5 years, Washington Innovations transformed from a startup into a tech powerhouse valued at over $2 billion. Marcus built his company with diversity at its core, creating opportunities for talented professionals from all backgrounds who had been overlooked elsewhere. His wife, Sophia, a brilliant neurologist who had faced similar barriers in medicine, stood beside him through every triumph and setback. Together, they raised their daughter Zara to believe in her unlimited potential despite a world that might try to impose limitations based on her skin color. The latest chapter in Marcus's success story was perhaps his most ambitious yet. For years, he had experienced discriminatory treatment while traveling for business, particularly on Skylight Airways, one of the country's largest carriers. When the opportunity arose to acquire a controlling stake in the airline through a private equity maneuver, Marcus seized it. The transaction was completed just days ago, making him the majority owner while keeping his name off all public announcements temporarily. He planned to implement sweeping changes to address the airline's notorious customer service issues, especially their documented pattern of discriminatory treatment toward passengers of color. To celebrate this milestone and spend quality time with his family after months of intense negotiations, Marcus planned their first real vacation in 3 years. They would fly to Barbados on Skylight, their newly acquired airline. Though Marcus made a crucial decision, they would travel as ordinary passengers with no special treatment or announcement of his ownership status. "I want to experience exactly what our customers experience," he told Sophia as they packed. "That's the only way we'll truly understand what needs changing." Little did they know this decision would catapult them into a nightmare that would test not only their resilience, but the very systems Marcus had just acquired. Zara was most excited about the trip, bouncing around their penthouse apartment with her beloved stuffed elephant Ellie, a gift from her grandmother before she passed away. At 10 years old, Zara was perceptive beyond her years, already recognizing the different treatment her family sometimes received. "Dad, are we going to fly in the fancy seats?" she asked, eyes wide with excitement. Marcus smiled, kneeling to her level. "Yes, sweetheart. First class all the way because you deserve the best." What Marcus didn't tell his daughter was that this journey was also an intelligence mission. Every interaction, every service moment would inform his complete overhaul of company culture once he publicly took the reins. The Washington family boarded their airport shuttle that morning with no inkling that their fact-finding mission would become a fight for dignity that would shake the airline industry to its core. The Washingtons arrived at O'Hare International Airport 3 hours before their flight, dressed in comfortable but elegant travel attire. Despite their first-class tickets, the family experienced subtle discrimination from the moment they approached the Skylight check-in counter. The agent's smile faltered when they presented their IDs, her eyes widening slightly at their premier status. "Are you sure you're in the correct line?" she asked with thinly veiled skepticism, glancing at their designer luggage as if assessing whether it was counterfeit. Marcus calmly pointed to the first-class sign above them. "Yes, we're quite sure," he replied, maintaining his composure as he always did in these situations, having learned long ago that showing frustration would only reinforce stereotypes. After receiving their boarding passes with reluctant apologies, the family proceeded through security and to the first-class lounge where again, the attendant scrutinized their credentials longer than necessary before granting entry. Inside, Zara's excitement momentarily overcame the tension as she discovered the complimentary hot chocolate station. Sophia squeezed Marcus's hand. "Just breathe," she whispered. "Tomorrow we'll be on the beach, and none of this will matter." Marcus nodded, not wanting to ruin their vacation before it began, but made mental notes of each interaction for future company reforms. Have you ever experienced someone assuming you don't belong somewhere just because of how you look? Type 1 in the comments if you've faced prejudice like the Washingtons, and 2 if you've been fortunate enough to avoid it. If you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of their appearance, hit that like button right now and subscribe to hear more stories of courage against discrimination. When boarding began for first-class passengers, the Washingtons stood and gathered their carry-on items. As they approached the gate, 2 flight attendants, later identified as Karen Whitfield and Tyler Graham, exchanged glances as the family presented their boarding passes. "Another charity case," Karen muttered, just loud enough for Tyler to hear, though Zara caught the comment and looked questioningly at her mother. "They're letting anyone up front these days," Tyler replied with a smirk. The family proceeded down the jet bridge despite the comments, determined not to let prejudice spoil their hard-earned vacation. Once aboard the aircraft, the discrimination escalated from subtle to overt. Karen deliberately skipped the Washingtons during the pre-flight beverage service, attending to every other first-class passenger with exaggerated courtesy. When Sophia politely raised her hand to request a glass of water and a pillow for Zara, Karen's response was immediate and hostile. "You'll have to wait until after takeoff like everyone else," she snapped, despite having just served the white passenger across the aisle. Marcus started to object, but Sophia touched his arm. "It's not worth it," she whispered. "Let's just enjoy our trip." But Karen wasn't finished. She returned minutes later, leaning uncomfortably close to Sophia. "If you're going to be combative, I'll need to speak with the captain," she threatened, twisting Sophia's simple request into alleged aggression. Several nearby passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances, with one elderly white woman, later identified as Dr. Eleanor Hayes, looking particularly disturbed by the interaction. "Excuse me," Marcus interjected calmly. "My wife simply asked for water and a pillow. There was nothing combative about it." Karen straightened up, her eyes narrowing. "Sir, I suggest you watch your tone. We have a zero-tolerance policy for aggressive behavior on this aircraft." The confrontation quickly drew attention from throughout the first-class cabin. Passengers began whispering, some surreptitiously recording on their phones. Zara clutched, her stuffed elephant tighter, her small face pinched with anxiety as the situation deteriorated. Karen summoned her colleague Tyler, who approached with security personnel already on speed dial. "These passengers are being disruptive," Karen announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, creating a false narrative of the Washington family as troublemakers. "We've had multiple complaints." This blatant lie hung in the recycled cabin air as Marcus looked around in disbelief, meeting the eyes of fellow passengers who had witnessed everything. What happens when those tasked with service become perpetrators of injustice? How would you react if you were in Marcus's position, trying to protect your family while facing such blatant discrimination? And what sinister developments await the Washingtons as the flight crew escalates their campaign against them? The tension is about to reach new heights. Not content with her initial harassment, Karen Whitfield systematically enlisted other crew members against the Washington family. She whispered to flight attendants entering the cabin, gesturing toward the family with meaningful looks, effectively creating an atmosphere of suspicion around them. "Watch that group in 2A through C," she instructed a younger attendant. "They've been difficult since boarding. The false narrative spread quickly among the crew, none of whom questioned Karen's characterization or sought to verify it themselves. The impact on young Zara was immediate and heartbreaking. The 10-year-old, normally vibrant and curious, shrunk into her seat, her dark eyes filling with tears as she witnessed the adults around her treating her parents with unwarranted suspicion. "Mommy, why is the lady being mean to us?" she whispered, voice trembling. Sophia, struggling to maintain her own composure, pulled Zara close. "Some people make unfair judgments, sweetheart. We just need to stay calm and show them who we really are." But the child's distress was evident, her small body tense with anxiety that no child should have to experience. Michael Peters, the senior flight attendant with 20 years of experience, initially attempted to defuse the situation. After observing Karen's behavior from the galley, he approached the Washington family with a professional smile. "Is everything all right here? Can I get you anything before takeoff?" Before Sophia could respond, Karen intercepted, pulling Michael aside. "They've been combative with multiple crew members," she insisted, her voice low but urgent. "The woman threatened me when I told her to fasten her seatbelt." Michael glanced back at the family, noting that all three had their seatbelts securely fastened, but Karen's authoritative tone and confident allegations created doubt. The situation escalated, dramatically, when Captain Richard Stevens was summoned to the cabin. A tall, imposing figure in his crisp uniform, Stevens received a completely biased report from Karen, who presented a fiction of aggression and rule-breaking by the Washington family. "The passengers in 2A through C have been hostile to multiple crew members," she reported with false professionalism. "They've ignored safety instructions and made threatening comments. Several other passengers have expressed concern. Michael, who might have offered a more balanced perspective, remained silent, unwilling to challenge a colleague openly. Captain Stevens, without seeking any verification or speaking directly with the Washingtons, made a decision based entirely on Karen's one-sided account. His approach to the family was coldly authoritative, looking primarily at Marcus as he spoke. "Sir, I understand there's been some difficulty with following crew instructions and cooperating with our flight attendants." Marcus began to respond. "Captain, there's been a misunderstanding," but Stevens raised his hand to silence him. "My crew's assessment is final. I need your family to deplane immediately." The humiliation intensified with the public announcement that followed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay in departure." The captain's voice resonated through the cabin speakers. "We need to address a security situation before we can proceed." All eyes turned to the Washington family, passengers craning their necks to observe as security was summoned. Whispers rippled through the cabin, most passengers unaware of what had actually transpired but quick to assume the worst, based on the crew's treatment of the family. Marcus, maintaining remarkable composure given the circumstances, made one final attempt at reasonable discussion. "Captain, I request a private conversation to explain our side of the situation." His professional tone and measured words stood in stark contrast to the alleged aggression he'd been accused of. Captain Stevens, however, had already committed to his course of action. "That won't be necessary. Security has been called, and they'll escort you off if needed. This is a safety decision that's not open to negotiation." Within minutes, 2 airport security officers appeared at the cabin door, summoned by the crew's report of unruly passengers. The officers' hands rested near their tasers as they approached, clearly prepared for resistance despite the family's calm demeanor. Passengers watched in shocked silence, some recording discreetly on their phones, as a simple request for water had somehow escalated to a security incident. The Washington family found themselves trapped in an escalating nightmare, victims of prejudice masquerading as protocol, with no apparent way to halt the machinery of discrimination now fully in motion against them. The arrival of airport security transformed the already tense situation into a scene of unnecessary force and public humiliation. 2 burly officers strode down the aisle with hands hovering near their weapons, approaching the Washington family, as if confronting dangerous criminals, rather than a professional couple and their young daughter. "We need you to gather your belongings and come with us immediately," the lead officer commanded, his voice deliberately loud enough to be heard throughout the cabin. The theatrical nature of their approach seemed calculated to create maximum embarrassment. The sight of uniformed officers approaching her parents triggered a panic attack in young Zara. The child began hyperventilating, her small body trembling violently as she clutched her stuffed elephant. "I can't breathe, Mommy," she gasped between sobs, her face contorted in fear. Sophia, though shaken herself, immediately shifted into medical mode, drawing on her neurologist training. "Look at me, Zara. Focus on my voice," she instructed gently, demonstrating slow, deep breaths for her daughter to mimic. "Count with me. 1, 2, 3. Even as she attended to her terrified child, one of the officers impatiently tapped his foot, making no allowance for the child's obvious distress. "Sir, my daughter is having a panic attack," Marcus explained, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around him. "My wife is a doctor. Please give us a moment to stabilize her condition." The security officers exchanged glances, momentarily uncertain, but Karen quickly intervened. "They're stalling," she declared loudly. "This is exactly the kind of disruptive behavior we've been dealing with." Her statement effectively erased any hesitation from the officers, who stepped forward more aggressively. "Ma'am, you need to control your child and exit the aircraft now," one demanded, showing no compassion for Zara's obvious medical distress. Recognizing the deteriorating situation, Marcus reached for his phone to call Harrison Reed, his chief operating officer who could verify his identity and ownership of the airline. "I'm calling our company executive who can clear this up immediately," he explained, attempting to de-escalate the situation through official channels. Before he could complete the call, Karen swooped in and violently knocked the phone from his hand. "No recording allowed," she snapped, though Marcus had been attempting to make a call, not record. "Playing the victim card won't work here." The phone skittered across the floor, disappearing under a seat several rows away. The commotion attracted the attention of all passengers, many of whom began filming the incident from various angles. One passenger captured Karen's aggressive action with the phone, while others documented the security officer's disproportionate response to the clearly non-threatening family. The multiple recordings would later prove crucial evidence, providing unbiased documentation of the discrimination unfolding in real time. Despite the many witnesses, no crew member intervened to question the escalating response to the Washington family. Throughout the cabin, reactions varied dramatically. Several African-American passengers watched with expressions of grim recognition, having experienced similar treatment themselves. Yet most remained silent, understanding that intervention might subject them to the same fate. White passengers displayed reactions ranging from uncomfortable discomfort to outright distress, but few spoke up. One notable exception was Dr. Eleanor Hayes, an elderly white woman seated across the aisle, who rose shakily to her feet despite the fastened seatbelt sign. "This is absolutely unconscionable," she declared in a clear, authoritative voice that belied her 70 years. "These people have done nothing wrong. I've been watching this entire time." Karen immediately moved to silence Dr. Hayes. "Ma'am, you need to sit down and fasten your seatbelt. This is a safety issue." The implication was clear. Challenge the crew's actions, and you might be next. Dr. Hayes reluctantly returned to her seat, but not before making direct eye contact with Marcus, a silent acknowledgement of the injustice she was witnessing. Her brief stand represented the exception rather than the rule, highlighting how easily discrimination flourished when good people remained silent observers. Despite Marcus and Sophia's complete cooperation, the security officers physically grabbed their arms to escort them off the plane. "Keep your hands where I can see them," one officer instructed Marcus, as if he posed a threat. The family was marched down the aisle like criminals, with Zara still struggling to breathe between sobs. In the chaos of their forced removal, Zara's beloved stuffed elephant Ellie was left behind on her seat, a loss that would prove devastating to the already traumatized child. As they exited the aircraft, the last thing they heard was Karen's satisfied voice announcing, "We apologize for the delay, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be on our way shortly now that the situation has been handled." The Washingtons were escorted through the terminal in full view of hundreds of travelers. the public spectacle clearly designed to maximize their humiliation. Marcus walked with dignity despite the circumstances, his arm around Zara, while Sophia whispered reassurances to their daughter. But the worst was yet to come, as the family was about to discover that their ordeal was far from over. The machinery of institutional discrimination once set in motion would not be easily stopped, even for a man who technically owned the very company perpetrating it against him. The Washington family was hustled into a sterile detention room deep within the airport security area, a windowless space with harsh fluorescent lighting and uncomfortable metal chairs bolted to the floor. The door closed behind them with an ominous click, the sound of the lock engaging like a final punctuation mark on their dignity. A small surveillance camera blinked in the corner, its red light a constant reminder of their surveillance. For Marcus Washington, a man who had built a billion-dollar empire and now owned the very airline detaining them, the irony was as painful as it was infuriating. "I need to explain something to you," Marcus addressed the two security officers, who remained in the room. "There's been a serious misunderstanding. I'm actually the majority owner of Skyalite Airways. This entire situation is completely inappropriate." Rather than receiving the shocked recognition he expected, his statement was met with derisive laughter. "Yeah, and I'm Jeff Bezos," the taller officer replied, exchanging amused glances with his colleague. "We get all types in here claiming to be VIPs, celebrities, or owners. Save it for someone who might believe you. Has this ever happened to you? Being dismissed or disbelieved simply because of how you look? Type 1 in the comments if you've ever had your credentials or position questioned based on your appearance. Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves the basic dignity of being taken at their word until proven otherwise. And subscribe for more stories that shine a light on the everyday injustices many people face. What could possibly happen? Next to the Washington family, trapped in a detention room while the very company they own continues to mistreat them. Sophia, meanwhile, discovered alarming bruises forming on her arm where the security officer had gripped her during their forced removal from the plane. She rolled up her sleeve, examining the marks with her physician's detachment, despite the personal violation they represented. "I'm documenting these," she said quietly, using her remaining personal item, a compact digital camera that security had overlooked, to photograph the developing bruises. This type of physical handling is completely unwarranted and excessive. The most concerning aspect of their detention was Zara's deteriorating condition. The traumatized child had progressed from panic to a dissociative state, sitting silently, with vacant eyes, refusing to speak or respond to her parents' gentle questions. "She needs her medication," Sophia explained urgently to the uninterested officers. "She has mild anxiety, and her medicine is in our carry-on bags. She also needs her comfort toy that was left on the plane, a stuffed elephant named Ellie. It's critically important for her psychological well-being." The security supervisor, James Thornton, entered the room with a clipboard and an air of bureaucratic indifference that suggested he had prejudged the situation entirely. "Your belongings will be retrieved and returned to you after we complete processing," he stated without looking at the family. "As for items left on the aircraft, filing a lost and found claim is your responsibility after this matter is resolved." His dismissive tone made it clear that Zara's emotional needs were of no concern to him. "My daughter is experiencing acute trauma," Sophia insisted, her medical authority evident in her tone. "As a board-certified neurologist, I'm telling you, she requires immediate access to her anti-anxiety medication and her comfort object." Thornton barely glanced at the child before responding. "Ma'am, if you continue to be difficult, we can arrange separate detention areas. Many people claim medical necessity to avoid standard procedures." Marcus, realizing the futility of reasoning with Thornton, requested his one phone call, a right typically associated with criminal arrest rather than customer service incidents. "I need to contact my company executive," he stated firmly. "This situation has gone far beyond reasonable protocol." After nearly 30 minutes of bureaucratic delays, Marcus was finally permitted to use a monitored line to call Harrison Reed, his chief operating officer and trusted lieutenant. "Harrison, it's Marcus," he said when the call connected. Have a situation at O'Hare. Sophia, Zara, and I have been removed from our flight and are being detained by airport security based on completely fabricated allegations. He quickly outlined the situation, conscious of Thornton's eavesdropping presence. Bring the documentation of our recent acquisition and the legal team. Yes, the acquisition. This is precisely why we needed those changes. Harrison's shocked response was audible even to Sophia across the room. His assurance that he was on the way immediately, offering the first glimmer of hope since their ordeal began. While they waited, Thornton intensified the uncomfortable atmosphere with subtle intimidation tactics, standing too close when speaking to Sophia, addressing comments to Marcus in a deliberately condescending tone, referring to them as "you" people when discussing procedure. When Marcus calmly called out this behavior, Thornton's response was telling. I treat everyone according to how they behave, not how they look. The statement might have sounded reasonable, if not for the overwhelming evidence to the contrary in his every interaction with the family. What the Washingtons didn't know yet, but would discover during subsequent legal proceedings, was that Supervisor Thornton had a documented history of discrimination complaints. 3 African-American passengers had previously filed formal grievances about his conduct, all mysteriously dismissed during internal reviews. His personnel file, later subpoenaed, would reveal performance evaluations noting his firmness with difficult passengers, a coded phrase that masked the targeting of minorities for enhanced scrutiny and harsher treatment. For 90 excruciating minutes, the Washington family remained in detention, Zara's condition worsening as time passed. The child now curled into herself on the uncomfortable metal chair, her arms wrapped around her knees in the protective posture of profound distress. Sophia maintained contact, gently rubbing her daughter's back while monitoring her breathing. Marcus alternated between controlled fury and strategic planning, mentally cataloging every violation for the legal reckoning he now knew was inevitable. What had begun as a fact-finding family vacation had transformed into a battle for justice that would ultimately reshape not just Skylight Airways, but the entire industry's approach to racial bias. The atmosphere in the detention room shifted dramatically with the arrival of Harrison Reed, accompanied by 2 impeccably dressed attorneys from the Washington Innovations legal team. Harrison, a tall man with salt and pepper hair, and the commanding presence of someone accustomed to boardrooms rather than detention facilities, entered with purposeful strides. The security officers straightened instinctively at the unexpected arrival of what was clearly an executive force. I'm Harrison Reed, Chief Operating Officer of Washington Innovations, he announced without preamble. I'm here regarding the unlawful detention of our CEO and his family. Supervisor Thornton's dismissive expression froze as the attorneys introduced themselves, presenting business cards with the embossed logos of one of the nation's most prestigious law firms. There seems to be a misunderstanding, Thornton began, his tone noticeably more cautious. These individuals were removed from a Skylight Airways flight for disruptive behavior, according to standard protocol. Harrison's expression hardened. That's interesting, considering Mr. Washington is the majority owner of Skylight Airways as of last week. I have the documentation right here. The legal team produced a leather portfolio containing notarized ownership documents, SEC filings, and board resolutions confirming Marcus Washington's controlling interest in the airline. Thornton's face cycled through expressions of disbelief, confusion, and finally, the dawning horror of recognition. There must be some mistake, he stammered, but the evidence was irrefutable. Marcus, who had maintained his composure throughout the ordeal, finally spoke. No, Mr. Thornton, the mistake was how my family was treated today, and it's a mistake that will have significant consequences. Word of the revelation spread quickly through airport security channels, reaching airline management within minutes. Captain Richard Stevens and flight attendant Karen Whitfield were summoned to the detention room, their previous swagger replaced by visible apprehension as they entered. Karen blanched visibly upon seeing Marcus seated behind Harrison and the legal team, the power dynamic now completely reversed. Mr. Washington, Captain Stevens began awkwardly, had we been aware of your connection to the airline? That's precisely the problem, Captain, Marcus interrupted, his voice measured but unyielding. My family and I should have been treated with dignity and respect, regardless of who we are or who you thought we were. The fact that your behavior changes based on my ownership status, rather than basic human decency, is exactly what needs to be addressed. Karen shifted uncomfortably, attempting to reframe the narrative. There were protocols we were following for passenger safety, she offered weakly. It was nothing personal. Sophia, who had remained focused on Zara throughout the confrontation, looked up with quiet fury. Nothing personal? My daughter is traumatized. I have bruises from being manhandled by security. We were publicly humiliated based on completely fabricated claims. Please explain which safety protocol required any of that. Karen had no response, her eyes darting to Captain Stevens for support that wasn't forthcoming. The airline representatives offered half-hearted apologies, saturated with references to misunderstandings and standard procedures, each statement carefully worded to minimize liability rather than express genuine remorse. We take these matters very seriously, Captain Stevens recited, as if reading from a crisis management script. This type of miscommunication isn't reflective of Skylight's values. Marcus listened without expression, allowing them to entangle themselves in corporate doublespeak that would later contrast sharply with video evidence of their actions. After what the airline representatives clearly hoped would be accepted as sufficient apology, Thornton announced that the Washingtons were free to go and their belongings would be returned immediately. The family's carry-on items appeared with suspicious promptness, suggesting they had never actually required processing as previously claimed. When Zara's medication was finally provided, Sophia administered it immediately, though the psychological damage of the experience couldn't be so easily addressed. Among the returned items was Zara's smartphone, a recent gift from her parents that the security team had overlooked in its significance. The device contained audio recordings Zara had been making throughout the flight as part of a vacation diary project, inadvertently capturing Karen's discriminatory comments, the false accusations, and the escalation that followed. This digital evidence, combined with passenger videos already circulating online, would form an irrefutable record of the day's events that no corporate statement could dismiss. As the family prepared to leave the detention area, Harrison discreetly showed Marcus his tablet, where notifications from news outlets and social media platforms were already flooding in. Passengers from the flight had uploaded their videos of the Washington's removal, and the story was gaining traction with alarming speed. Initial headlines focused sensationally on the conflict without context. Family removed from flight after confrontation with crew, and security incident delays. Skylight flight at O'Hare. What had begun as a private humiliation was rapidly transforming into a public relations crisis for Skylight Airways. A crisis that would soon reveal deeper systemic issues within the company Marcus now owned. As they walked through the terminal, toward the waiting corporate car, the Washingtons maintained their dignity despite stares from travelers who recognized them from the already viral videos. For Marcus, the path forward was clear but complex. This wasn't just about personal vindication, but about fundamental transformation of a culture that had allowed such discrimination to flourish unchecked. Within hours of the Washingtons' detention, their humiliating removal from the aircraft had become the centerpiece of a national conversation about racial bias in commercial aviation. Videos from multiple passenger perspectives flooded social media platforms, each clip offering a slightly different angle that collectively painted an undeniable picture of discrimination. The most damning footage showed Karen Whitfield violently knocking the phone from Marcus's hand while he attempted to make a call, directly contradicting the airline's initial statement that the family had been non-compliant with crew instructions regarding electronic devices. The impact on Skylight Airways was immediate and devastating. By evening, the company's stock had plummeted 17%, erasing over $400 million in market value as investors panicked over the potential fallout. The airline's social media accounts were inundated with angry comments, many from travelers sharing their own experiences of discrimination on Skylight flights. A boycott Skylight began trending nationally, with celebrities and influencers amplifying calls for accountability. Corporate partners, sensitive to association with racial controversy, began quietly distancing themselves from the airline. Skylight's public relations team mounted a frantic response, issuing a carefully worded statement that acknowledged an unfortunate incident while avoiding any admission of discriminatory behavior. Skylight Airways takes all passenger concerns seriously and is conducting a thorough investigation of today's events. The safety and comfort of all passengers remains our highest priority. The statement's deliberate vagueness and failure to address the racial dynamics at play only fueled public outrage, with commentators noting the contrast between the company's diversity-themed advertising campaigns and the treatment of the Washington family. The story fractured along predictable lines in traditional and social media. Major news networks covered the incident with varying emphasis, some focusing on the viral nature of the videos while others explored the broader context of discrimination in the airline industry. Comment sections revealed a divided public response. While many expressed outrage at the family's treatment, others defended the airline staff with arguments about following protocol and maintaining order, often using coded language that revealed underlying racial biases. Captain Richard Stevens, against explicit instructions from airline management, gave an unauthorized interview to a sympathetic local news outlet. This was simply a miscommunication that escalated unnecessarily, he insisted, his uniform and authoritative demeanor lending weight to his misleading narrative. The crew was responding to disruptive behavior as they've been trained to do. At 30,000 feet, we don't have the luxury of second-guessing potential security threats. His framing of the Washington family as a security threat, without any substantiating evidence, further inflamed the controversy and directly contradicted passenger accounts. While Captain Stevens sought to control the narrative publicly, flight attendant Karen Whitfield pursued a more insidious strategy behind the scenes. Having vanished from public view after being placed on administrative leave, she began leaking selective internal documents to sympathetic media contacts, training materials, security protocols, and heavily edited communication logs to construct a defense based on procedural compliance rather than personal accountability. More disturbingly, she helped propagate a conspiracy theory suggesting Marcus had orchestrated the incident for publicity to justify organizational changes following his acquisition. This false narrative gained traction in certain corners of the internet, where anonymous accounts questioned the convenient timing of the incident. Why would a billionaire fly commercial when he owns private jets? One widely shared post demanded, ignoring that Marcus's ownership of the airline was precisely why he wanted to experience its service firsthand. This was a staged event to help him fire employees and cut costs, another claimed, without evidence. These conspiracies, though easily debunked, created sufficient doubt to complicate the public conversation. Behind closed doors, members of Skylight's board of directors, still adjusting to the reality of Marcus's controlling interest, began pressuring him through back channels to handle this quietly. Senior board member Victoria Lawson, representing old guard investors, called Marcus directly. "We all find this incident regrettable," she began diplomatically. "But a protracted public battle serves no one's interests. A private settlement and some sensitivity training for staff would allow us all to move forward without further damage to the brand." The implication was clear. Business interests should supersede principles of justice and accountability. Marcus's response was unequivocal. "Victoria, this isn't about brand damage control. This is about addressing systemic discrimination that apparently permeates this company's culture. If the board's primary concern is stock prices rather than treating human beings with dignity, that only confirms the depth of the problem." The call ended with Victoria's thinly veiled warning that a prolonged controversy could face resistance from remaining board members who, while not controlling shareholders, could still create significant operational obstacles. As the Washington family retreated to their home to process the trauma of the day, particularly focused on Zara's well-being, an unexpected ally emerged. Dr. Eleanor Hayes, the elderly passenger who had briefly stood up for them on the aircraft, contacted Washington Innovations through their corporate website. A retired professor of social psychology with expertise in institutional bias, Dr. Hayes offered her unequivocal testimony about what she had witnessed. "I was directly across the aisle from this family," her statement began, "and can categorically confirm they did nothing to provoke or justify the treatment they received. What I witnessed was textbook discriminatory escalation, and I am prepared to testify to that effect in any forum necessary. Meanwhile, in the boardrooms of competing airlines, executives saw opportunity in Skylight's crisis. Victor Reynolds, CEO of rival carrier Transglobal Airways and a longtime competitor of Marcus in various business ventures, convened an emergency strategy meeting. "We need to capitalize on their vulnerability," he instructed his team. "Accelerate our diversity campaign launch, offer special promotions to Skylight's corporate accounts, and make sure our public statements express appropriate concern while highlighting our own inclusive policies." What Reynolds didn't share with his team was his simultaneous effort to fuel the controversy through media contacts and industry insiders, ensuring maximum damage to Skylight's reputation, and by extension, to Marcus Washington's new venture. The Washington family's ordeal had transcended a personal incident of discrimination to become a corporate battlefield, a media spectacle, and a flashpoint in ongoing national conversations about race and accountability. What none of the players yet realized was that the most dangerous phase of the conflict was just beginning. That those who had perpetrated the discrimination were not simply fighting to save their jobs, but were preparing to escalate their retaliation in ways that would threaten not just the Washington family's reputation, but their safety and well-being. 3 days after the airport incident, as media attention intensified rather than diminished, the Washington family discovered that their ordeal had entered a more sinister phase. Marcus's private email account received the first threat at 2:17. A message containing the family's home address, Zara's school schedule, and the chilling line, "Not everyone will apologize when they realize who you are." Similar messages followed across multiple platforms, each containing personal information that shouldn't have been easily accessible, suggesting a coordinated effort to intimidate the family into silence. "We need to take these seriously," Sophia insisted, her doctor's analytical mind already calculating risk factors. "This isn't just internet trolling." Marcus agreed, immediately engaging their corporate security team to enhance protection protocols and coordinate with local law enforcement. The family relocated to a secure temporary residence, disrupting their lives further but providing necessary safety. For Zara, already traumatized by the airport incident, the sudden move and addition of security personnel created a new layer of anxiety. "Are the bad people coming to our house?" she asked in a small voice as they packed essential items, a question no parent should ever have to answer. Have you ever experienced how quickly hate can escalate from words to threatening actions? Drop a 1 in the comments if you believe anonymous threats should be taken seriously from the start, or a 2 if you think most online intimidation is just empty words. Hit that subscribe button if you want to follow stories about standing strong against intimidation. And like this video if you believe no family should ever face threats for simply standing up against discrimination. How far will the retaliation against the Washingtons go? And will the threats remain virtual or cross into the physical world? Harrison Reed's cybersecurity team made a disturbing discovery while investigating the source of the threats. They uncovered an exclusive online forum where airline employees from multiple carriers shared information about passengers they deemed problematic, predominantly people of color, Muslims, and those with non-Western names. The forum, operating under the innocuous name Smooth Skies Network, contained thousands of posts with racist commentary, passenger information, and coordination to ensure targeted travelers received consistently poor treatment across different airlines and routes. Karen Whitfield was not merely a member of this network, but one of its most active contributors, with a history of posts detailing her techniques for identifying and managing difficult passengers, thinly veiled code for racial profiling. Screenshots from the forum revealed her sharing personal information about the Washington family the night before their flight, including seat assignments and routing, essentially placing a target on them before they even boarded. "Got a first-class upgrade family tomorrow," she had written. "We'll make sure they understand where they really belong." As Harrison presented these findings in Marcus's temporary office, the scope of the discrimination became clear. "This isn't an isolated incident or a single biased employee," Harrison concluded grimly. "This is systematic targeting across multiple airlines." Karen was executing an established protocol shared among like-minded crew members. The revelation explained the immediate hostility the family had faced. but raised more disturbing questions about how widespread these practices might be throughout the industry. While grappling with this discovery, Marcus encountered an unexpected technical obstacle. Attempting to access Skylight's executive systems to implement immediate policy changes, he found his authentication failing across multiple platforms. "I'm locked out," he informed Harrison with growing concern. "Someone's revoked my access credentials." A call to the IT department revealed that the directive had come through proper channels with appropriate authorization codes, suggesting either a security breach or internal sabotage at the highest levels. An emergency board meeting was convened virtually to address both the continuing public relations crisis and the apparent internal resistance to Marcus's leadership. The atmosphere was tense as board members took their positions on the video conference, faces carefully composed into masks of corporate concern. Board Chair William Harrington opened with practiced gravity. "Given the ongoing situation and potential liability concerns, we're convening to discuss appropriate leadership during this critical period. There's been a motion to temporarily transfer operational control from Mr. Washington to the Executive Committee until matters are resolved." The strategy became immediately clear. Using the crisis Marcus's family had suffered as justification to sideline him from his own company. The legal team had anticipated this move, preparing Marcus with countermeasures that left the board visibly unsettled. "Actually, William," Marcus responded calmly, "as majority shareholder, I've signed a resolution removing that option from the board's authority without my explicit consent. We can focus instead on addressing the actual discrimination issues, rather than attempting a power transfer." While Marcus battled corporate politics, Sophia confronted a different type of attack. Her medical practice began receiving an unusual number of complaints filed with the state medical board, all citing vague concerns about patient care without specific incidents. Simultaneously, negative online reviews appeared across multiple platforms, clearly coordinated and using similar language. The strategy was obvious: attack the family's professional credibility and economic stability while they were already dealing with the emotional fallout of the original incident. Most concerning was the impact on Zara. The 10-year-old had not returned to school since the incident, initially due to her emotional state, but now because of security concerns. Her normally active social media accounts, where she shared her interest in science and technology with friends, became flooded with harassing comments. Even her school's internal messaging system showed evidence of unauthorized access attempts. The psychological burden on the child manifested physically: nightmares, loss of appetite, and regression to behaviors she had outgrown years earlier. "I want to go home," she whispered to Sophia one night in their secure temporary housing, surrounded by unfamiliar furniture and security personnel. "I want my real bed and my books." Sophia held her daughter close, fighting back her own tears. "I know, sweetheart. We all do." The conversation led to a difficult discussion between Marcus and Sophia later that night, with Sophia raising the possibility of taking Zara abroad to stay with relatives until the situation stabilized. "Maybe we should consider Switzerland," she suggested. "My sister would welcome us, and Zara would have some normalcy away from all this." The suggestion cut Marcus deeply, not because it lacked merit, but because it represented exactly what the orchestrated campaign intended: to separate his family, disrupt their lives, and force them to retreat from the principles they were fighting for. "They want us to run," he said quietly. "They want us to learn the lesson that standing up against discrimination comes at too high a price." Sophia nodded, understanding the larger implications, but equally unwilling to sacrifice their daughter's well-being for principle alone. "We need to find another way," she concluded, "one that protects Zara while still holding them accountable." The coordinated nature of the attacks pointed increasingly toward involvement beyond disgruntled airline employees. Harrison's investigation team uncovered communications between Karen Whitfield and executives at Transglobal Airways, including several encrypted messages exchanged with accounts linked to CEO Victor Reynolds himself. The timeline of these communications aligned perfectly with the escalation of both public and private attacks on the Washington family, suggesting corporate espionage had evolved into personal vendetta. The most damning evidence emerged When corporate security discovered sophisticated listening devices installed in the Washington's temporary residence, professional-grade equipment that far exceeded what an individual like Karen could access independently. The discovery prompted immediate relocation to a new secure facility and a complete communications blackout, except through encrypted channels. The family had moved beyond facing mere discrimination to confronting a coordinated, corporate conspiracy designed to silence them and protect the systems of bias that permeated the airline industry. For Marcus Washington, the escalation clarified what was at stake. This was no longer simply about one family's mistreatment or even one company's corporate culture. They had inadvertently exposed an extensive network of institutionalized discrimination, spanning multiple organizations, with powerful interests invested in maintaining the status quo. The path forward would require not just personal courage, but strategic brilliance to counter adversaries willing to use increasingly dangerous tactics to protect their power and privilege. The Washington family's secure residence felt more like a fortress than a home. Security personnel monitored entrances, windows were equipped with bulletproof glass, and daily routines required careful planning and coordination. For a family that had once lived with freedom and spontaneity, the constraints of their new reality were suffocating. Marcus watched from a secluded office window as Sophia attempted to create some semblance of normalcy for Zara in their small, enclosed garden, a shadow of the life they had built together over years of hard work and dedication. Dr. Winters thinks we should consider trauma counseling as a family, Sophia reported after Zara's latest therapy session. The child psychologist had expressed growing concern about Zara's withdrawal and nightmares. Once vibrant and curious, the 10-year-old now spoke little, jumped at unexpected sounds, and refused to discuss returning to school even when security arrangements were proposed. She's drawing the same scene repeatedly, Sophia added, showing Marcus artwork, where dark figures surrounded a small family, the child figure always separated from the parents. The symbolism was unmistakable and heartbreaking. The strain was evident in Marcus and Sophia's relationship as well. Their typical synchronicity and decision-making had given way to tension and occasional sharp words, both exhausted and processing trauma differently. "You're buried in the corporate battle while our daughter is falling apart," Sophia had snapped during a particularly difficult evening, immediately regretting the words but unable to fully retract them. Marcus had responded with uncharacteristic defensiveness. "I'm fighting for her future, for a world where she isn't treated the way we were." The disagreement had ended with both retreating to separate rooms, the distance between them growing, precisely when they needed each other most. Their professional lives suffered equally profound disruption. Sophia's medical practice partners had called an emergency meeting to discuss the reputational concerns affecting their clinic. While expressing personal support, they outlined the practical reality of declining patient bookings and nervous hospital administrators questioning her hospital privileges. "They're suggesting a leave of absence until things settle," Sophia explained. To Marcus, her voice hollow with the betrayal of colleagues she'd worked alongside for years. "Apparently my involvement in a controversial situation might compromise patient care, though no one can explain exactly how." For Marcus, the corporate battleground grew increasingly hostile. Several longtime business associates quietly distanced themselves, meetings were canceled without explanation, and invitations to industry events mysteriously disappeared. Harrison Reed reported that potential business partners were receiving anonymous communications warning against association with Washington Innovations during this period of instability. The message was clear. Standing against discrimination carried concrete professional consequences designed to make the economic cost too high to bear. Perhaps most disturbing was the resurrection of past discrimination claims from Marcus's career before his entrepreneurial success. Anonymous sources provided media outlets with selectively edited details from a complaint he'd filed against a previous employer 15 years earlier, framing him as someone with a history of racial grievances, rather than a professional who had legitimately challenged workplace discrimination. The narrative being constructed portrayed the Washingtons not as victims of bias, but as people who played the race card when it served their interests. The mounting pressure led to a difficult conversation between Sophia and Marcus that neither had wanted to initiate. I've been researching schools in Geneva, Sophia admitted one evening after Zara had finally fallen asleep with the help of prescribed medication. My sister has connections at the international school, and they have excellent security and psychological support. She paused, meeting Marcus's eyes with determination mixed with regret. I think Zara and I should go for a while, just until you've resolved the immediate situation here. The suggestion landed like a physical blow. Though Marcus understood the rational argument for separating the family temporarily for Zara's well-being, the prospect of losing his support system while fighting the most significant battle of his career was devastating. They win if we separate, he said quietly, voicing the fear that had been growing since the threats began. That's the entire point of this campaign, to make us retreat, to break us apart, to ensure the price of challenging the system is too high for anyone else to attempt it. Sophia's response was equally quiet but firm. This isn't about winning or losing a corporate war, Marcus. It's about our daughter's mental health. She's 10 years old and traumatized. This environment isn't helping her heal. The truth of her words hung between them, neither able to deny the impossible position they found themselves in. The discrimination they had faced on the airplane had metastasized into a force threatening to tear apart everything they valued. Their family unity, their professional standing, their sense of safety in the world they had worked so hard to succeed in. Harrison arrived early the next morning with news that solidified the growing sense that they were facing a coordinated attack rather than isolated incidents. Someone offered me $2 million to provide testimony questioning your mental stability, he reported, disgust evident in his voice. The approach came through 3 layers of intermediaries, but we've traced it back to a shell company. With connections to Transglobal Airways, they're trying to build a case that you're unstable and manufactured the discrimination incident as part of a delusional persecution complex. While this information confirmed their suspicions about corporate espionage, it offered little practical comfort. Marcus found himself in the lowest moment since the ordeal began, seriously considering whether continuing the fight was worth the mounting personal cost. Maybe we should settle, he suggested to Harrison that afternoon, the words tasting like defeat. Structure a quiet resolution. Implement internal changes at Skylight without the public battle. Let Sophia and Zara return to normal life. The very suggestion represented everything he had fought against throughout his career. The quiet compromises that allowed systemic discrimination to persist unchallenged. That evening, as the family sat in uncomfortable silence during dinner, a security officer delivered a small package that had been thoroughly screened according to protocol. Inside was Zara's missing stuffed elephant, Ellie, lost during their removal from the airplane weeks earlier. Zara's face transformed with the first genuine smile they had seen in weeks as she clutched her beloved comfort object. Ellie came back, she whispered, examining the toy with careful fingers. She looks different, though. Sophia's medical training made her instantly suspicious. Let me see her, sweetheart, she suggested, gently taking the stuffed animal. Her careful examination revealed expert stitching along one seam that hadn't been present before. With growing concern, she used a small pair of scissors to carefully open the stitching, revealing something unexpected hidden inside the stuffing. A miniature recording device with substantial storage capacity that had clearly been functioning for some time. Marcus's security team immediately secured the device, careful to preserve any evidence it might contain. Technical analysis revealed it had been activated shortly after the airport incident and contained recordings from airport, offices, airline facilities, and most recently, the board meeting where the attempt to remove Marcus had been discussed. The device appeared to have been planted by someone with access to secure areas, then deliberately returned to the family through channels that suggested inside knowledge of their security protocols. What had initially appeared to be a cruel reminder of Zara's trauma now emerged as something potentially valuable, an opponent's mistake that might contain crucial intelligence about the forces arrayed against them. The question remained, who had returned the stuffed animal? And why? Was it a sympathetic insider trying to help? Or had the recording device been discovered by an ally after being planted by an enemy? The mysterious delivery offered both new concerns about their security and the first tangible hope that the tide might be turning in their favor. The recording device hidden in Zara's stuffed elephant proved to be a strategic error by their opponents and a turning point in the Washington family's fight. The technical team worked through the night to extract and analyze its contents, revealing conversations never intended for documentation. Most damning was a recorded meeting between Karen Whitfield, Captain Richard Stevens, and 3 Skylight executives where they explicitly discussed strategies to discredit Marcus's account of discrimination, with one executive stating, "We need to control the narrative around Washington. If we admit racial bias in this case, we're opening ourselves to millions in similar claims." Harrison Reed assembled a specialized task force combining legal experts, cybersecurity specialists, and investigators with aviation industry backgrounds to systematically build their counteroffensive. "We're not just fighting individual bad actors," Harrison explained during a strategy session in the secure facility. "We're exposing an industry-wide system that enables discrimination while maintaining plausible deniability. The recording is crucial, but we need to establish the broader pattern." The team meticulously tracked Karen Whitfield's digital footprint, discovering her communications extended far beyond Skylight Airways. Email records obtained through legal channels revealed she had been in regular contact with customer service, representatives and flight attendants at 6 major airlines, sharing passenger information and coordinating discriminatory treatment of travelers of color. The Smooth Skies Network forum post contained coded language identifying targeted passengers and suggesting management techniques that violated both airline policies and federal anti-discrimination laws. Captain Richard Stevens' professional history revealed a pattern that had been hidden by careful documentation practices. While his personnel file contained only minor disciplinary notes, cross-referencing incident reports with passenger demographics uncovered a statistical anomaly. Stevens had been involved in removing passengers from aircraft at a rate 8 times higher than other captains on the same routes, with nearly 90% of those removed being people of color or those with non-Western names. When confronted with this data by investigators, 3 former crew members broke ranks, providing sworn statements about Stevens's explicit instructions to find reasons to remove certain passengers he deemed not first-class material. The connection to Transglobal Airways CEO Victor Reynolds emerged through financial forensics rather than direct communication. A complex series of payments through shell companies linked Reynolds to funding the online harassment campaign against the Washingtons. More concerning were documented meetings between Reynolds and 2 Skylight board members in the days immediately following the incident, suggesting corporate espionage had evolved into active collusion to undermine Marcus's leadership and force a distressed sale of his controlling interest in the airline. While Harrison's team pursued institutional evidence, Sophia activated her own professional network. Dr. Eleanor Hayes, the passenger who had briefly spoken up during the original incident, proved invaluable not just as a witness but as a respected authority. As Professor Emerita of Social Psychology specializing in institutional discrimination, Dr. Hayes analyzed the incident through an expert lens. What the Washington family experienced represents textbook escalation of bias incidents, where initial microaggressions are systematically amplified to justify increasingly severe responses to perceived transgressions that never actually occurred. Former Skylight employees, emboldened by the growing evidence and legal protection offered by Washington's team, began providing testimonials about the company culture. A former flight attendant trainer revealed that while official materials stressed equal treatment, informal coaching included recognizing potentially problematic passengers based on criteria that closely correlated with racial and ethnic characteristics. A baggage handler described systematic, special handling procedures for luggage belonging to passengers flagged in the reservation system, with coded designations that predominantly affected minority travelers. The investigation hit a significant obstacle when airport security footage from the day of the incident was reported accidentally deleted during routine system maintenance. This convenient erasure of evidence raised immediate red flags, prompting Harrison to engage specialized data recovery experts. Their efforts uncovered not just the deleted footage, but evidence of deliberate tampering, including a digital trail leading to a terminal used exclusively by airport security supervisor James Thornton. The recovered footage provided unequivocal visual confirmation of the excessive force and discriminatory handling the Washington family had endured. Dr. Hayes leveraged her academic connections to organize a coalition of passengers from the original flight willing to provide formal statements. 37 passengers came forward with consistent accounts contradicting the crew's version of events, with 12 providing video recordings from various angles. Particularly compelling was footage from a business traveler seated directly behind the Washingtons, capturing Karen's unprovoked aggression and the family's consistent composure throughout the escalating situation. Sophia contributed critical, medical evidence by documenting a pattern of passenger profiling through her professional contacts in emergency medicine. Working with hospital colleagues, she compiled anonymized data showing that passengers removed from flights for medical concerns demonstrated a clear demographic pattern inconsistent with actual health emergency statistics. This analysis suggested that medical justifications were being systemically misused to remove passengers based on racial and ethnic profiling, rather than legitimate health concerns. Marcus, meanwhile, leveraged his technology background to develop a groundbreaking approach to the evidence gathering. His team created sophisticated data analytics tools that processed thousands of social media posts, customer complaints, and internal airline communications, identifying language patterns consistent with discriminatory intent while filtering out unrelated content. This methodology established statistically significant correlation between certain coded phrases used by airline personnel and subsequent adverse actions against minority passengers. As the evidence mounted, Marcus developed a strategic approach that differed significantly from conventional corporate crisis management. Rather than seeking quick resolution through private settlement, he prepared for a comprehensive public reckoning that would force fundamental industry change. "We're not just building a case for compensation," he explained to Sophia and Harrison. "We're creating a blueprint for industry-wide reform that can be implemented across every airline, starting with Skylight." The family maintained the appearance of retreat and consideration of settlement offers, deliberately allowing their opponents to believe their campaign of intimidation was succeeding. This strategic misdirection provided critical time to complete their evidence gathering while the opposition grew increasingly confident and careless in their communications. With each piece of evidence, the picture became clearer. What had happened to the Washington family wasn't an isolated incident of bias by rogue employees, but the visible tip of an institutional iceberg of discrimination that had operated unchallenged for decades. By the time the emergency board meeting was scheduled to vote on Marcus's leadership, his team had assembled an irrefutable case documenting not just the discrimination his family had faced, but the systemic problems throughout Skylight and beyond. The evidence pointed to uncomfortable truths about how racial bias had been normalized and institutionalized within aviation industry practices, protected by corporate structures designed to isolate incidents as individual failures rather than symptoms of a pervasive culture. The Washington family had transformed from victims into architects of accountability, preparing to use the very corporate power structures that had enabled discrimination as the tools to dismantle it permanently. The Skylight Airways boardroom exuded wealth and tradition, mahogany paneling, leather chairs, and a sweeping view of the city skyline through bulletproof glass windows. Board members arrived with the practiced confidence of corporate veterans, accustomed to wielding power, exchanging measured pleasantries while studiously avoiding direct references to the purpose of the emergency meeting. Chairman William Harrington's assistant distributed leather portfolios containing the agenda, with the primary item clinically stated, "Leadership Transition Planning, Stability Measures During Crisis Resolution." Marcus Washington arrived last, deliberately timing his entrance after the other directors had settled, accompanied only by Harrison Reed, rather than the expected legal team. His composed demeanor confounded those who had anticipated a desperate man fighting to maintain control. Instead, he projected the calm authority of someone already certain of the outcome, taking his seat at the head of the table with a courteous nod to those assembled. The subtle shift in several directors' postures revealed their unease at this unexpected confidence. "Before we begin, I should note that we have an observer joining us today," Harrington announced, gesturing toward a distinguished-looking man in the corner. "Victor Reynolds, CEO of Transglobal Airways, has expressed interest in our situation and potential investment opportunities should certain reorganization occur. As a courtesy to a potential partner, I've invited him to observe Our proceedings. The revelation confirmed what Marcus had suspected. The coordination between Skylight directors and his corporate rival had progressed to open collaboration in anticipation of a forced sale. Harrington called the meeting to order with practiced formality. Given recent events and their impact on company operations, the executive committee has prepared a temporary leadership transition plan designed to stabilize operations during this period of uncertainty. The careful phrasing barely disguised the intended coup, removing Marcus from operational control while maintaining the appearance of corporate governance protocols. We've prepared a resolution transferring day-to-day authority to the executive committee for a 90-day period, allowing Mr. Washington to focus on his personal situation. Before discussion could begin, the boardroom door opened as security admitted Karen Whitfield and Captain Stevens, both looking uncomfortable but determined. As this matter stems from their direct involvement in the incident, Harrington explained, we've asked these employees to provide first-hand context for our deliberations. The strategy was transparent, presenting the discrimination as a misunderstanding between employees and customers, rather than a systemic failure requiring accountability at the highest levels. Marcus allowed the narrative to unfold without interruption, watching as Karen presented a carefully sanitized version of events that portrayed the Washington family as uncooperative passengers who had escalated a routine service interaction. Captain Stevens followed with technical references to safety protocols and federal regulations, framing his actions as necessary procedure rather than discriminatory overreaction. Throughout both presentations, Marcus took notes quietly, his lack of visible reaction clearly unsettling both speakers who had anticipated immediate challenge. Thank you for that perspective, Marcus finally spoke after they concluded. Before we proceed to a vote on the proposed resolution, I'd like to share some relevant information that may influence the board's thinking. He opened his laptop, connecting it to the boardroom display system. I had planned a conventional presentation, but recent developments suggest a more direct approach. With a few keystrokes, he activated not a presentation but a live stream connection that was simultaneously broadcasting to the company's internal communication system and, unknown to most present, major news networks and social media platforms. What's the meaning of this? Harrington demanded, rising halfway from his chair, as he realized the meeting was now visible to thousands of employees and millions of external viewers. This is a confidential board proceeding. Actually, William, Marcus responded calmly, as controlling shareholder, I've amended our transparency policies. Skylight's 16,000 employees deserve to understand the company's response to documented discrimination by our staff, as do our customers, shareholders, and regulatory overseers. The stunned silence in the room confirmed that none had anticipated this level of preparation or willingness to take the conflict public in real time. What followed was a methodically devastating presentation of evidence, beginning with the unedited videos from multiple passengers showing the actual events on the aircraft, a stark contrast to Karen and Captain Stevens' sanitized accounts moments earlier. As these played on both the boardroom screen and to the growing external audience, Marcus continued his systematic dismantling of the cover-up, revealing internal communications showing coordinated efforts to discredit his family, rather than address the discrimination they had experienced. The recording device discovered in my daughter's stuffed animal provided particularly valuable insights, Marcus noted, playing selected audio of executives discussing strategies to contain the Washington situation through manufactured narratives and character assassination rather than accountability. The faces around the boardroom table grew increasingly pale as their private conversations became public evidence of complicity. Karen Whitfield abruptly stood to leave, only to find the boardroom door now guarded by federal agents who had arrived discreetly during the presentation. We're also joined by representatives from the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division and the FAA Office of Civil Rights, Marcus announced, acknowledging the federal officials who had entered the room. They've been investigating discrimination, complaints against Skylight Airways and other carriers for some time, and our situation has provided compelling evidence for their ongoing cases. The revelation that federal investigations predated the Washington incident transformed the context entirely. What the board had treated as a PR problem requiring containment was now clearly exposed as potential corporate liability requiring cooperation with authorities. Marcus then directed the presentation toward the broader pattern, displaying statistical analysis of passenger removal incidents across the airline, revealing undeniable demographic disparities that couldn't be explained by behavior or coincidence. "This isn't about one family's experience or a few employees' actions," he explained, his voice gaining intensity without losing control. "This is about a corporate culture that enabled systematic discrimination while building deniability into its very structure." Most damning was evidence of board-level knowledge of these patterns through quarterly risk management reports that had flagged potential discrimination liabilities for years, with no meaningful action taken. Several directors visibly shifted in their seats, suddenly aware of their personal exposure in the emerging legal landscape. Victor Reynolds, who had maintained silent observation from the corner, discreetly attempted to exit, but found his path similarly blocked by federal officials. "Mr. Reynolds' involvement deserves particular attention," Marcus continued, directing all eyes to the rival CEO. "Financial records obtained through legal discovery reveal Transglobal Airways funded both the online harassment campaign against my family and provided resources for today's attempted boardroom coup." Supporting documentation appeared on screen, including bank transfers through shell companies and encrypted communications between Reynolds and several Skylight directors seated at the table. The federal agents moved with practiced efficiency, serving subpoenas to specific individuals including Reynolds, Karen Whitfield, and 2 board members. "These are document preservation orders, not arrests," the lead agent clarified, though the distinction provided little comfort to those receiving the official papers. "All recipients are now legally prohibited from destroying or altering any records related to the ongoing federal investigation." The boardroom dynamics shifted visibly. As directors processed the comprehensive exposure of their involvement, some immediately distanced themselves from the conspiracy, claiming they had been misled about the situation's severity or not fully briefed on management's response. Others sat in stunned silence, calculating their legal vulnerability. Harrington attempted to regain control, suggesting the meeting adjourn for legal consultation, but Marcus held his position firmly. "There's still a resolution before this board," he reminded them, "but I've taken the liberty of offering an alternative." New documents appeared in the directors' electronic portfolios, a comprehensive anti-discrimination reform plan for Skylight Airways, including independent oversight, mandatory reporting, and significant financial commitments to changing company culture from root to branch. Each director now faces a choice that will be recorded for both legal and historical purposes. Vote to continue the failed approach that brought us here, or support measurable, transparent change. The vote that followed was unanimous in favor of Marcus's plan, though motivated more by self-preservation than sudden conversion to principles of equality. As the meeting concluded, Marcus addressed not just the boardroom, but the much larger audience now watching. "What happened to my family wasn't unique, it was simply visible. The real work begins now. Transforming this company into one that treats every customer, employee, and stakeholder with the dignity they deserve, regardless of who they are or what they look like." As the directors filed out past federal officials, documenting their information for ongoing investigations, Marcus remained at the table, finally allowing himself a moment to absorb the magnitude of what had just occurred. The corporate power structure that had enabled discrimination had been exposed to unprecedented scrutiny, and the path to meaningful change, while challenging, now lay open before him. The personal cost had been enormous, but the opportunity for systemic transformation made it a price he remained willing to pay. 1 year after the boardroom confrontation that transformed Skylight Airways, Marcus Washington stood at a podium in the company's newly renovated training center, addressing the first graduating class of flight attendants trained under the airline's comprehensive anti-bias program. "Your completion of this course represents more than professional certification," he told the diverse group before him. "It symbolizes our commitment to creating an aviation environment where everyone is treated with dignity regardless of who they are or where they come from." The changes at Skylight over the past 12 months had been revolutionary by industry standards. The company had implemented the aviation industry's most rigorous anti-discrimination protocols, establishing independent oversight committees with genuine authority to investigate complaints and recommend binding corrective actions. Every employee, from baggage handlers to executives, underwent regular bias recognition training developed in partnership with civil rights organizations, while hiring practices were restructured to eliminate barriers that had historically limited diversity in leadership positions. Karen Whitfield and her closest collaborators had faced significant consequences for their actions. Federal prosecutors had brought charges related to civil rights violations, conspiracy, and evidence tampering, resulting in plea agreements that included substantial community service requirements, working with organizations serving communities they had previously discriminated against. Captain Richard Stevens had avoided criminal charges by cooperating with authorities, providing crucial testimony about informal practices that had enabled profiling throughout the industry, while accepting responsibility for his own actions through public acknowledgement and educational outreach. The broader Smooth Skies network had been dismantled through coordinated action across multiple airlines, with participating employees facing consequences ranging from mandatory retraining to termination depending on their level of involvement. More importantly, the exposure of this shadow system had prompted industry-wide re-evaluation of policies that had allowed discriminatory treatment to flourish behind the protection of subjective customer service and safety justifications that were selectively applied based on passengers' race or ethnicity. Sophia Washington had channeled her experience into creating a pioneering support program for victims of discrimination, combining her medical expertise with insights from trauma specialists to address the psychological impact of such incidents. Discrimination isn't just a social injustice, it's a mental health issue with measurable physical effects, she explained to healthcare professionals at a recent conference. By acknowledging and treating these impacts, we're validating experiences that have too often been dismissed as oversensitivity. The program now operated in partnership with several major airlines, including Skylight, providing both immediate intervention and ongoing support for passengers who experienced bias incidents. For young Zara, recovery had been a gradual journey, marked by both setbacks and remarkable resilience. The trauma of the original incident had left lasting effects, but with consistent therapy and unwavering family support, she had slowly reclaimed her confidence and natural curiosity. Most significantly, she had channeled her experience into becoming an unexpected young advocate, speaking to student groups about standing up against unfairness and helping create a children's book series about recognizing and responding to discrimination. "I was really scared when it happened," she told a reporter from a youth magazine who interviewed her about the book series. "But my parents showed me that when something unfair happens, you can use your voice to help make things better, not just for yourself but for other people too." Her simple articulation of this principle had resonated with children and parents nationwide, transforming a traumatic experience into an educational tool that helped young people understand complex social issues through accessible stories. Dr. Eleanor Hayes, whose courage in speaking up during the original flight incident had provided crucial witness testimony, now served as chairperson of Skylight's newly established Passenger Advocacy Board, comprising diverse representatives including disability advocates, religious minorities, and racial justice experts. The board reviewed policies and practices from the passenger perspective, ensuring that customer experience considerations included recognition of how seemingly neutral rules could result in discriminatory application. The transportation industry watched Skylight's transformation with a mixture of skepticism and reluctant admiration. Initial predictions that the airline would suffer financially from its aggressive reforms proved unfounded. Instead, customer satisfaction scores reached record highs, employee retention improved dramatically, and the company's reputation recovery translated into market share growth that outpaced competitors. This concrete demonstration that ethical practices could align with business success prompted other airlines to adopt similar reforms, though few matched Skylight's comprehensive approach. Victor Reynolds had faced personal and professional consequences for his role in the corporate espionage and harassment campaign. Transglobal Airways Board had forced his resignation after federal investigations revealed the extent of his involvement, while civil litigation from the Washington family resulted in significant personal financial penalties. The case established important legal precedent regarding corporate officer liability for orchestrating discrimination and harassment campaigns, creating accountability mechanisms previously lacking in corporate law. Most profoundly, the Washington family had gradually rebuilt their sense of security and normalcy. After months in secured housing, they had returned to their home, though with enhanced but unobtrusive security measures. Sophia had resumed her medical practice with a renewed focus on addressing health disparities in minority communities. Marcus divided his time between leading Skylight's ongoing transformation and speaking engagements advocating for corporate responsibility in addressing systemic discrimination. Their experience had forever changed them, but the family had refused to allow it to define them. The most unexpected development came 6 months after the boardroom confrontation, when Marcus received a letter from Tyler Graham, the flight attendant, who had been Karen Whitfield's junior partner in the original discrimination incident. After losing his position and facing the consequences of his actions, Tyler had undertaken a genuine process of reflection and education. His letter acknowledged his complicity without excuse, detailed the understanding he had gained about the harm caused by his participation in discriminatory practices, and outlined the community work he had voluntarily undertaken with organizations serving minority youth. After careful consideration and consultation with Sophia, Marcus made a controversial decision that drew criticism from some advocates, but aligned with his vision of meaningful change. He offered Tyler a position in Skylight's new corporate compliance department, believing that reformed participants in broken systems could become powerful advocates for transformation. True justice isn't just about punishment, Marcus explained when questioned about the decision. It's about creating pathways for genuine change, both in systems and in the people who operate within them. 1 year to the day after their original flight, the Washington family once again prepared to board a Skylight aircraft bound for their long-delayed Barbados vacation. The contrast with their previous experience was stark from the moment they entered the terminal. The staff at each checkpoint was visibly diverse, interactions were consistently respectful, and their first-class boarding proceeded without incident or hesitation. The cabin crew, led by a black senior flight attendant, welcomed them aboard with the same professional courtesy extended to all passengers. As they settled into their seats, Zara clutched her restored stuffed elephant Ellie, no longer containing any hidden devices, but now wearing a small pin with the Skylight logo, a gift from the employee resource group that had formed in the wake of the Washington incident. When the child had initially hesitated at the boarding door, Sophia had gently reminded her, "Remember what we practiced, sweetheart. Deep breaths and focus on where we're going, not what happened before." The captain's voice came over the intercom, professional and welcoming as she introduced herself and the flight crew. As pre-flight preparations continued, Marcus observed the cabin crew's interactions with all passengers. Consistent, respectful, attentive to needs without bias or assumption. The transformation wasn't perfect. True cultural change would require ongoing vigilance and commitment. But as the aircraft lifted into clear skies, Marcus allowed himself to acknowledge a profound truth. Sometimes justice doesn't mean erasing what happened, but ensuring it creates meaningful change that prevents others from experiencing the same harm. As Zara gazed excitedly through the window at the receding landscape below, Marcus exchanged a quiet smile with Sophia. The cost had been enormous, personally, professionally, emotionally, but watching their daughter's confidence slowly rebuild as she witnessed her parents stand firmly for principle had reinforced their core belief. Challenging discrimination wasn't just about addressing isolated incidents, but about creating systems where dignity wasn't determined by appearance, background, or circumstance. The Washington family's journey through trauma to transformation had become something larger than themselves, a template for turning personal injustice into institutional change that would benefit countless others they would never meet. The Washington family's harrowing journey teaches us profound lessons about confronting discrimination in today's world. First, it demonstrates that racism persists, not just through individual actions, but through systems designed to protect those in power while isolating incidents as misunderstandings. The story reveals how silence and complicity allow discrimination to flourish when bystanders remain quiet, they become unwitting participants in injustice. We see that standing against discrimination carries real costs, both personal and professional, which explains why many choose the path of least resistance. Perhaps most importantly, this narrative shows that meaningful change requires more than punishing individual offenders. It demands dismantling and rebuilding the very structures that enable discrimination. The Washington family's experience illustrates that true justice isn't achieved through revenge, but through transformation that prevents others from suffering similar indignities. Their story reminds us that privilege isn't just about advantages some receive, but about indignities others endure simply because of their appearance. Finally, we learn that courage in the face of injustice can create ripples far beyond a single incident. By refusing to accept private settlement and fighting for systemic change, Marcus and Sophia Washington turned their personal trauma into a catalyst for industry-wide reform. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't just personal resilience, but the determination to ensure no one else faces what you experienced. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and struggled with whether to speak up? What would you have done if you were on that flight with the Washington family? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and tell us about a time when you stood up against injustice, or wish you had. If you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of their race or background, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge us to build a more just world. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the real impact of discrimination and the power we all have to create change. Thank you for being part of this important conversation, and remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be silent when witnessing injustice.